everyone, I'm Georgia and this is The Sound of Georgia. You didn't see my t-shirt because it's zoomed in all the way, but today we're talking about Wicked. Specifically, the book versus the musical. Gregory Maguire's Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, was published in 1995, and it was rather successful. But of course, as this is 2024 and not 1995, if you've heard about Wicked, you've probably heard of the musical that came out in 2003 and was written by Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman. That is nowadays far more popular than the book it was originally based off. And honestly, that's probably because they actually don't have a lot in common when you get down to it. So this video will contain spoilers for both Wicked the musical and not just Wicked the book, but also the 3 sequels in that series. Yes, there are sequels. Mostly we're just going to be focusing on the first book, but the sequels are worth bringing up to some degree. So I'm going to say it right off the bat, I like the musical more. A lot more. Not just because it's my first musical and there's a lot of nostalgia connected to it. My relationship with it is kind of interesting, but in the wake of the new Australian production, I am reminded very much of how much I love it. But that is not the only, or probably even the main reason I like the musical more. The main reason would definitely have to be the fact that they are actually very different. Because the musical has transcended the book's popularity, and I think nowadays probably the biggest reason people would pick up the book is because of the musical. Whether they really liked the musical or whether they didn't. And I will say, if you pick up the book expecting the musical in novel format, you will be disappointed. Because it is not like that at all. Not just in terms of how the plot is different, but also the themes. But let's start with the book. So, spoilers from here on out. I'm not going to be putting a note or anything on the screen because I don't know how much longer this will last. Probably the rest of the video. So, from here on, watch at your own risk. As the title suggests, the book chronicles the life and times of the Wicked Witch of the West. It does take a lot of influence from the original Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, probably mostly regarding the geography of Oz as a place. There's a scene in the first part of the book where the witch's father explains the geography of the country, and the map at the beginning of the book is very reminiscent of the original Wonderful Wizard of Oz map. Even the witch's name, Alphabet, is a pun reference on L. Frank Baum. But the book is not absent of the iconicness of the 1939 Wizard of Oz film. If you didn't know, in the original Wonderful Wizard of Oz book, the witch is not green. And while the 1939 film is still under copyright, thank you Disney for that, if they've lost their poster boy, the book does take influences from there, mainly the Wicked Witch being green. The book does have Elphaba being green. And that isn't just it's more iconic than in the book, I have to put it in there thing. It's definitely part of the plot. The book is split up into 5 parts. Munchkinlanders, Gillikin, City of Emeralds, In the Binkus, and The Murder in Its Afterlife. So the book follows Elphaba for the first couple years of her life in Munchkinland, 2 years at Shiz University, in Gillikin, a few months in her mid-20s, in City of Emeralds. Then we have a big time jump for In the Binkus, which starts when she's about 30, and the rest of the book chronicles that point all the way to the end of her life when Dorothy melts her. Honestly, rereading it, it reminded me quite a lot of Susan Kay's Phantom, especially in the beginning, which does make sense. They're both retellings and they both came out within a few years of each other. Because the first part of the book only chronicles the first couple years of her life, and then we have a big time jump, the book really doesn't start chronicling her life until part 2, when she's in her late teens. So it makes sense that that is where the musical would start. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because really the parts from the book that made it into the show are very minimal, as I said. It's really just the second part of the book. Wicked is one of those books that, as I said, most people would probably read right now because of the success of the musical. And as you're reading it, you kind of go, how the frick did they get the musical out of this? While at the same time thinking, yes, it absolutely makes sense. how they got the musical out of this. The second part of the book is basically Act 1 of the musical, but the rest of the book and the rest of the musical are completely different. Part 3 of the book, as I said, only covers a few months, when Elphaba's about 25 and she's hiding underground in the Emerald City. We'll get back to this. And she meets up with her old school friend Fiyero Tagilla, our main love interest in both versions, and they have a few month-long torrid secret affair. So musical fans, basically imagine As Long As Your Mine was months long instead of one night, and X-rated. Then at the end of this part, Fiyero dies horribly. At this point, Elphaba's basically gone rogue. She's part of the movement for bringing down the wizard and doing so from within the Emerald City, underground there. So when the Gale Force, the equivalent of the police, I guess, figure out what's going on, they follow Fiyero back to the hideout and kill him. And this is a pretty big deal, because Elphaba is hung up on this for the rest of the book. This part of the book is really where she's the most happiest ever, and she spends the next 20 years of her life hung up on the role she played in her mother's death. And for a lot of the time, you are wondering what the heck is going on? Why is she like this? And for the most of the book, it does seem very weird that this would be the biggest thing she's hung up on, until you get to the end, and then it all makes sense. So after Fiyero dies, we have a big time jump of about 7 years. She's been living in a nunnery basically this whole time. Part 4 starts when she leaves there to head off to the west. And she's gone there in search of Fiyero's widow. It was a child bride arranged marriage situation, and her plan is to ask for forgiveness. Also, she's trailed around by this 7-year-old boy that, come on, we all know is her son. It just so happens she's not sure. And Fiyero's widow does not want to hear anything Elphaba has to say. Elphaba tries to apologise and beg for forgiveness, but Sarima will not hear it. And after tragedy befalls her and her children, Elfie's lost all hope for that. Her last chance for forgiveness is gone. Her family is very staunchly religious, and she's obviously a complete 180 and a very strong atheist. And it's really after this point that she is completely 100% convinced she does not have a soul. So after that, she spends the rest of the time hiding out in the castle in the west. She comes back to Munchkinland a couple times to visit her father and her sister. We will get to Nessarose, I promise. But for the most part, she's over there just going by day to day, trying to help all those monkeys that live around there. And then Dorothy shows up. And this is where it starts to all come together. Her son, Leah, has heard about why Dorothy and company are coming, and that killing her will grant them a favour from the wizard. Obviously, like in the original book and like in the film, the wizard has sent them there to kill her. But when Dorothy and Elphaba finally have their confrontation, Dorothy insists that that is not what she's there to do. Yes, that was why the wizard sent her. She promises Elphaba that she came there so that she could look her in the eye and say, "Can you forgive me for my part in the death of your sister, because I can't forgive myself." She's there to do exactly what Elphaba wanted to do. And that makes Elphaba pause for just long enough that the fiery broom she's brandishing at the little 10-year-old to catch her dress on fire, and Dorothy trying to save her, Scarecrow's nowhere to be found during this scene, throws a bucket of water on her, and she dies. So, unlike in the original musical, but like in the original Wizard of Oz stories, she is killed. The closest explanation the book gives is that she's basically allergic to water. After she's born, when they first try to give her a bath, she completely freaks out and runs away, and she never touches water for the rest of her life. And it's basically explained as her body never got a chance to build up an immunity to water. And so when she's doused in it, after 40 years of not touching it whatsoever, it sends her body into a fatal allergic reaction. So if you've seen the musical, and what I described did not in any way remind you of what you saw on stage, you're not alone, because it isn't. Really, there's only 2 scenes in the entire book that appear as one-for-one analogues, more or less, in the show. The first one being when the professor arrives at the university with the future cowardly lion in a cage, and Elphaba freaks out, cries injustice, and then grabs Fiyero when they run away to save him. The second is when Elphaba and Glinda go to the Emerald City and confront the wizard. But even this is slightly different. In the musical we have Shiz's headmistress, Madame Morrible, in cahoots with the wizard in his plan to suppress the animals, that being talking animals versus regular animals. This is the wizard's plan in the book as well, and it's what starts Elphaba on her path to joining the rebellion, and what sets her on the path to wickedness. But in the end it's love that makes her go off the rails. In the book, Madame Morrible is not there at all during the scene, and instead of causing a scene and flying off, Elphaba just quietly sends Glinda back to Shiz and decides she'll stay in the Emerald City and try to bring down this guy from the inside. Defying gravity is a lot less climatic in the book, and by less climatic I mean non-existent. The musical starts with Elfie's arrival at Shiz, and it continues there for the rest of the act, as she tries to fit in and makes friends with Gartlinda, and slowly figures out that awful things are happening to the animals. Then, when she gets to see the wizard, she causes the giant sting. I guess he's the one behind all of this, and she flies off in a new impassioned rage to fix all this. Act 2 starts with Fiyero and Glinda engaged, and it cuts to the worst scene in the entire show, where Elphaba goes to visit her sister Nessarose, and we find out what happened to the shoes. But then we're back to Glinda and Fiyero's engagement, and Elfie goes to confront the wizard again, but inadvertently crashes the engagement party, and then she and Fiyero run off together and have their special romantic moment. And then a house drops on Nessarose. Elphaba and Glinda have a spat. Gale first starts beating Fiyero up. Elfie goes back to the castle and tries to save his life. Glinda turns up and they have that beautiful For Good song, which is just say goodbye graciously. Dorothy melts her. Glinda takes charge after kicking the wizard out, and then Fiyero turns up as the Scarecrow, and we find out he and Elfie plotted the whole thing. She's alive and they run off together. So these are both wildly different stories, as you can tell. I wouldn't say the musical has a happy ending, it certainly doesn't. I would say it's a bittersweet ending, but it's a lot more straightforward, standard, for lack of a better word, story. I mean, you've seen this story before. Elphaba is very similar to, well, Elsa. Of course, there's the fact that they were originally both played by Adina, but Elphaba's desire to fit in is one of the strongest parts of her character in the musical. And as for Glinda, yes, she exists in the book. The big relationship in the musical, in my opinion, is not between Fiyero and Elphaba. It's between Glinda and Elphaba. And that is non-existent in the book. They're roommates and they're friends, but after Elfie sends her back to Shiz, they really don't see each other again. Their relationship is not nearly as prominent and not nearly as important to the story as it is in the musical. There are definitely more little details that I didn't mention from the book that make their way into the musical. After Fiyero starts getting beaten up because he let Elphaba escape, she rushes back to the castle in the west and tries to save his life. And we find out at the very end that she actually did save his life, and she transformed him into the Scarecrow. This does not come out of nowhere. There is a scene in the book where Elphaba sees the Scarecrow from her tower window and is briefly convinced that it is Fiyero, and she thinks that maybe it'll all be fine. If it's alive, then she can stop torturing herself. As it turns out, Fiyero is not the Scarecrow, but the musical took that and obviously made it the ending. Marble isn't really in cahoots with the wizard in the same way she is in the musical, but she's definitely bad news, and Elfie actually ends up, well, not killing her. She goes to kill her, only to find out she's already dead. But she smashes a trophy over her head anyway. The monkeys are different as well. We get Chistery in both, but in the book he's just a monkey they randomly pick up on their journey over to Kiamoko. In the book he's one of the wizard's servants. In the book it's the Grimoire, that magical spell book and Elphaba's powers, that give him and all the other monkeys wings. In the book it's also the Grimoire, but it's a lot more hands-on, practical, less magic. She's actually not nearly as magical in the book. Bok's not in love with Glenda, her father's not nearly quite as mean. There are some elements that definitely seem happier for her in the book, but with the exception of her mother and Nessarose, everybody who dies in the book gets to live in the show. The wizard's also her father and responsible for her green skin via a magical elixir in both. And Nessarose might not actually be Frex's. Ankle might be different, my battery died. Let's talk about Nessarose. I'm going to make a whole other video on Nessarose because she warrants a capital D discussion, but I'll just go over it very briefly here as well. Nessarose, aka the Wicked Witch of the East, is a problem. Obviously the Wicked Witch of the East is the one with those sparkly magic shoes that the Wicked Witch of the West wants so much for reasons. In the original 1939 movie it's because they're powerful, apparently. In Wicked, both book and movie, it's really just because Elfie wants to keep sake of her sister. They are implied in the book to have some level of power, but mostly it's just she wants something of her sister. But it's really what the shoes do. That being allowing Nessarose to walk. In both versions of the story, Nessarose is disabled, and in neither version is she able to walk. In the book she has no arms, and the reason she can't walk is explained as being a balance thing. In the musical she's in a wheelchair. That was a lot easier for them to get across on stage. And after the shoes are enchanted, suddenly that doesn't matter anymore. Suddenly all of that is just irrelevant because now she can walk. This is problematic, especially in the musical. It's a lot worse in the musical. This happens at the beginning of Act 2 when Elphaba goes to see her sister to beg for her father's help, and Nessarose confronts her as to why Elphaba never used any of her powers to help her. So in a last-ditch effort, Elphaba tries to enchant the shoes. And suddenly they go from bright silver to ruby red, and Nessarose stands up and suddenly she isn't disabled anymore. So, all happy? No. Not at all. Because she's in a wheelchair, what this means is when the shoes are enchanted and she is able to walk, suddenly she's not just able to walk, she's been cured. Suddenly we have a character who is disabled until she's not. Now, Nessarose as a specific character aside, this is bad because it reinforces the narrative that you cannot be disabled and happy. This is a happy ending for Nessarose because she wanted out of that chair, but in the real world it's a very harmful narrative. And I hate it. This is the one part of the show I really do not like. In the book, it's more tolerable, at least to me, for a couple of reasons. First of all, Elfie isn't involved at all. Glinda's the one who enchants the shoes. It happens completely off page, and she's not cured in the same way. Suddenly she's able to walk, but it doesn't make her grow arms. Ergo, she's still disabled. So it's a lot more forgivable in a way for me in the book. That doesn't mean I like it. I still don't like it, but it's less disrespectful. And to finish this off, I'm going to briefly talk about the sequels. There is no doubt in my mind that Wicked was intended to be a standalone novel. The second book, Son of a Witch, came out in 2006, meaning it came out after the musical, meaning the only reason it exists is because of the musical. The third book, A Lion Among Men, came out in 2008, and the fourth book, Out of Oz, came out in 2012. And I heard a rumour he was going to write some more. I'll read them. And these are interesting. Really, the biggest problem with all of them is that they exist at all. They're not bad. Gregory Maguire's writing is an acquired taste, but they're not bad. The problem is it just feels very forced. because, unlike in the musical, in the book Elphaba actually dies, the Wicked Witch of the West is the hinge that this series rests upon, and she is done in at the end of book 1. Suddenly it all kind of falls apart, meaning Elphaba has to continually be brought up over the course of the series. She's not a character in the rest of the series, but her ghost, for lack of a better word, haunts the rest of the series. Because we can't bring her back, but we can't have this story without her. The second book follows her son. Surprise, surprise, given the title. I mentioned earlier how in the books Pierrot has a wife. Well, he also has some kids. Lear's main goal at the beginning of the story is to try and find his half-sister, who was captured by the wizard. That just sort of fizzles out halfway through. Really, his entire thing in the book is to work out if he is Elphaba's son, which is confirmed in the last scene after his daughter is born, Green. Also, yeah, trigger warning for possible sexual assault for that book. Some of which is enjoyable enough if you liked Lear in the first book, but it is messy. Then, the third one is called A Lion Among Men, and it follows the Cowardly Lion, kind of. Really, this book exists to get from book 2 to book 4. Book 4 follows Lear's daughter, the little green one, but for whatever reason we couldn't just jump into her story straight away. So we have to have this weird filler book about the Cowardly Lion. Really, the only important part of A Lion Among Men is the last 50 pages or so. Basically, it's the lion telling his life story to Yakel, who's this oracle person within the series. Then the Clock of the Dragon Time shows up and informs us about Lear's daughter, Brr. Yes, that's his name, Brr. Telling his story to Yakel is completely pointless. The only part of the story important to the rest of the series is the ending. Lear's half-sister, the one he spent the first half of Son of a Witch trying to find, shows up with the Clock of the Time Dragon. The Clock of the Time Dragon plays a part in all of the books in the series, and it is the reason that giant dragon is on top of the stage in the show. But the Clock of the Time Dragon is not actually a clock. It's a puppet show. It's one of those travelling puppet theatres. And all the plays it shows are meant to be prophetic. Really, it's the hiding place for the Grimoire. And it's only after that point in Play Among Men that things actually become important. And then there's the fourth book in the series, Out of Oz, which follows Rain, who's Lear's daughter, the green one. This one is actually very interesting, because I feel like, in a way, Gregory Maguire was kind of responding to musical fans. I imagine so many more people picked up the book after the musical came out, and suddenly this isn't what I was expecting at all. And then they look and say, oh, sequels? This isn't anything close to the musical, and now there's a pointless one about the Cowardly Lion. I think he was trying to appease the musical fans a little in this one. Rain's story arc in Out of Oz is actually not that dissimilar from Elphaba's story in the musical. Yes, there are a lot of differences, but character-wise, Rain wants to find out who she is and where she belongs. She spends the first few years of her life working under Glinda, the servant in her household. Then she runs away and spends a whole lot of time with the Cowardly Lion as they bring the Clock of the Time Dragon around to various parts of Oz. Then she runs into her parents again. They send her to Shiz for a while, where she makes friends with this boy named Tip. And that's actually a really beautiful friendship they have. And Tip's got a bit of a secret of his own. And after that point things start going crazy. Also Dorothy's there. Yes, that Dorothy. But it's not just that musical Elphaba and Rain share a lot of similarities. There are direct quotes from the musical in Out of Oz. There's one point in the book where the Cowardly Lion and Nor are talking about what happened in her past, and she's talking about how much things have changed in her life, and she says, I'm not that girl, which is obviously a song in the musical. There's another point where they're talking about Glinda, and they talk about how there were rumours that she used to, quote, come and go by Bubble, which is a direct quote from the cat fight scene, and there's no way that isn't in there because of the musical, because we never see Glinda use a bubble in the books. But the one that really cinches it for me that he was absolutely peppering in musical references is at the very end. Very end, during the epilogues, Rain is trying to send Dorothy back, and Dorothy's trying to tell her how much she wishes things could have gone differently with both of them. And Rain interrupts her and says, "Don't wish, don't start, wishing only." And then it trails off to an ellipses. And this is obviously taken from I'm Not That Girl. That's a direct lyric from the song. But it's not just that she says it, it's how it's written. There is a "she said" in the middle of that sentence, meaning your attention is drawn to it more than it would be otherwise. So, I've been filming for ages. There's the end of this very exhaustive video about Wicked book versus musical. So would I recommend these? Yes. Kind of. I would absolutely recommend the musical. I know a lot of people think it's overrated, and I can see where they're coming from, but I still would recommend going to see it at least once. And I need a pro shot of it now. Would I recommend the book? Yeah, it's complicated. Yes, I would recommend it to a certain type of reader. Gregory Maguire's writing style is not going to appeal to everyone. And as I said earlier, if you are expecting the musical in novel format, you're going to be disappointed. But if you are aware of the fact that they are very different and are open to it, I would say give it a try. As for the rest of the series, that depends on how much you've liked the first book. The biggest problem with the series is that it's a series. But if you like the first one, feel free to give the others a go. Just don't worry about Lion Among Men. Just read the very ending. The rest of the book is superfluous. And that's everything I've got for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts on Wicked as a thing. Have you seen the show? Have you read the books? Have you done both? Which is your favourite? Stay safe, guys. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my video next time. So long, farewell!